Great.
Okay, I think we are recording, and I want to welcome everybody to part 5 of a 6-part series with our partners and presented by GrantsPlus, preparing your team to pursue federal grants. My name is not Maggie Martinelli, it is Vivian Williams, and I am charged with leading the Foundation's various community initiatives here. Just a quick welcome, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the Scranton Area Community Foundation here. As you know, we've been around since 1954 with assets of more than $55 million, distributing over $4 million in grants throughout 2020. And as I mentioned, I do lead the community initiatives here. So, you know, we have some great ones and are a 501c3 ourselves. So we are in compliance with the national standards of U.S. community foundations. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence and Community Leadership was founded in 2012 as a capacity building portion of the foundation. And we provide relevant trainings such as this one you're experiencing today, technical assistance and additional resources free of charge or at low cost to local nonprofits in order to help your capacity building needs. I want to take a minute and say thank you again to GrantsPlus for this wonderful multi-series webinar, and also welcome Matt Carter today with us. He's a senior advisor for GrantsPlus, managing the training practice there, and he gets to help people around the U.S. become better grant seekers. He also works with a diverse portfolio of clients in helping them find opportunities, develop grant strategies, cultivate funders, and write and submit proposals. Matt, thank you for joining us, and the Zoom is all yours.
All right, thank you. So let me move on here to just really briefly about GrantsPlus. I think most of you have been on a couple of these already, so I don't know that I need to go too in depth here, but just so you know that we know what we're talking about, we are a now 14-year-old, about to be 15-year-old organization that we do grants consultancy across the country. We help people you know, with anything from, hey, how do I find funders, to, hey, can we submit this federal proposal? And I am actually alone on our webinar today because Laura Altieri, who's one of our large and federal grant experts, promised that she was not going to have her second child before December 12th, and instead had it over the weekend. So she is recovering at home on family leave, so you are stuck with just me today. So having said all that, let me just talk really quickly about our partnership. I think you all know, again, I'm seeing some familiar names on here, that we are doing this webinar series. So we have, this is the 5th of 6 webinars. And then we're also doing one-on-one coaching sessions, which are really cool. I'll talk about those in a second. So as far as the webinars go, we have one left, and that is going to be about attracting national funders. I think that's going to be a great one. That is actually going to be delivered by our president and founder, who has tons of experience in this. So she is looking forward to it, and that is going to be in 2 weeks. So that is going to be great. I hope you're all signed up for that. And then the coaching session. So these are, for those of you who have not done this, again, I'm seeing a couple familiar names on here. For those of you who have not done one of these are where you get to sign up and talk to a GrantsPlus expert for about 30, 45 minutes. And just kind of talk through whatever grants issues you're having, you know, everything you've ever wanted to know about grants, but we're afraid to ask. And I feel like I need to say, this is not a, you know, come talk to one of our consultants for a sales pitch. This is something that the foundation is providing for you. You know, you don't end up on our mailing list, et cetera, et cetera. This is just a great opportunity for you to talk to a grants expert. Even if you are an expert yourself, get a different opinion. So the deadline for signing up for those for December, obviously December is going to be a bit of a shorter month, is Friday, December 3rd. And you will get an email afterwards, again, as we've done every time after these webinars, with a link to the recording of today's webinar and how to register for the next webinar and how to register for coaching. So you can go to the page for that. So I hope to see you all in coaching sessions. A couple of the more senior staff are doing them, and we love to do them because it's kind of we've got to think on our feet, get hit with a new problem, and talk it through. It's a lot of fun on our end. So let's get on to today. So we're going to talk about a few things today. And I should say, I am going to say federal a lot, but everything that we're talking about applies to large national funders. Basically big grants require teamwork. So let's talk about this. We're going to talk about why great grant seeking takes a team. We're going to talk about ways to spread responsibilities across your team members. For those of you who are development directors, this will probably perk up your ears. And we are going to talk about how to develop a shared work plan that ensures everything gets done. So I should also mention, as we are going here, please feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A. I may take a pause if I see something good come across here and answer that while we're talking. But I would also like to see if you could just put in chat, just in the next moment or two, what challenges have you encountered in applying for large grants? So federal grants, a national fund, or just a large thing. What challenges have you come across, if any? So if you could drop that into the chat, I can kind of keep an eye out for that and make sure I am addressing that if it comes up. So let's talk about a couple things here. So there's your pre-award and your post-award, and both take a team. So pre-award is before you get the grant, post-award is after you get the grant. So like I said, I'm going to say federal, but they are the extreme example of everything we're talking about today. This is basically all large grants, and they're pretty much impossible to do solo. So pre-award, you've got some things to do. You've got to find the proposal, first of all. You've got to develop a proposal. So that means you've got to write a narrative. You've got to come up with budgets. If there's partners involved, you're going to need letters of support or MOU for them. There's probably going to be a whole pile of attachments that you need. And this isn't going to be like when you apply to your friendly local funder, where they're going to want your board list and your latest audit. There might be some extensive attachments required. So you want to make sure that you are using your resources to get this. And actually, we just had one pop up here that said the greatest challenge is needing to get information from different departments for the grant. That could be a plan. That is the answer that we see most often, and that's why we're talking about this today, because we're going to talk about, a little spoiler, we're going to talk about involving those departments so that everyone has ownership for the grant and you don't feel like you're pulling teeth trying to get information out. So for your pre-award, you've got your developing, you've got your submission, and then you've got your waiting. Having knowledge of when new federal grants are designed too. Okay, whoever put that one in, if you want to hit us up for a coaching session, oh, that was Laurel. If you want to hit us up for a coaching session, we can talk about when to get in on federal grants and figure out how to get them before the RFP posts. So looking at that pre-award side, within that too, there is also finding and evaluating your opportunity. So again, Laurel, thank you. That could have been a plant. You've got to find your grant opportunity. You've got to evaluate it to decide if you should pursue it. You have to match your programming to it, and you have to figure out how you're going to do it. So a lot of times this falls on the development director or falls on the executive director. And that person is not always going to make the best call on this. And frankly, if the development director is the person driving it, it's not going to work great. So, when you're assembling your team, we're going to talk about why it shouldn't always be on the development person or the executive director to do these things, because there is knowledge from the team that is going to help with all of this. The context I use for this is a lot is because I've had a couple of university clients where the professors are the ones who actually have the knowledge of what they know and what they want to study and what they want money for. And the administrators are the one that actually go out and apply for the grants. And you end up with this horrible disconnect where administrators are saying things they shouldn't. And, the actual professors are not the ones finding the grants. So you end up in this scenario where you have the administrative side pushing the program side to do things they don't necessarily want to do, which is pretty much the worst case scenario. So we're going to talk about having everyone involved on that. And then post-award too, our work is mostly pre-award at GrantsPlus, but there is post-award stuff to do. You've got to make sure that the work is being done, that you're doing it the way it's supposed to, that you're doing what you promised you would do. And you've got to report on that. You know, again, federal is probably the most stringent, but large funders also want usually fairly detailed reports, and you know, some small funders too. So your ability to do all this well is also going to affect your ability to be a good grantee and get funding in the future. So this is all of these things are all team sport, and we're going to run through them. So let's talk about in that pre-award part, the components of the large proposal. So we kind of talked about, you know, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to write the proposal. So what are the components of that? So again, this is modeled after a federal proposal, but these are really what you're going to see in pretty much any large grant. And that's going to be, you know, some proof that your organization has a history of doing this and can do it successfully. Proof that there is a need for the work you're going to do, what you're actually going to do in that detailed work plan, who's doing what, and then that you have a plan for evaluation. And again, with large funders, a lot of times that is, and we will hire an outside evaluator. So that's what you got to put together for the narrative. So you can see, if you've never done one of these before, there's a fair amount of stuff here. You don't necessarily want to be doing that alone. There's also usually a bunch of attachments, and in many cases, those can be larger than the narrative. So you're going to need some help gathering them. You've got to usually have a budget. You've got to have staff bios, you know, especially for things if you're doing like HRSA grants. So health, you know, healthcare, mental health, you know, things like that. You've got to show that your staff that's going to be on the grant has the qualifications they need. You're going to need bios. You're going to need all sorts of fun stuff like that. If you have partners, you're going to need proof that those partners are in on the grant and, you know what's going on and are committed to it. So you're going to need your letters of commitment. You may need to show some proof of other funding. This is usually more in the reimbursement part, but you want to make sure that you have got some proof if there is a match required on your end, which a lot of times for federal grants there is, that you've got that funding. I have been in a situation with, I think it was National Endowment for the Humanities, where we had to send them canceled checks from another grant funder. So from a private foundation, it wasn't enough to have the letter that said we had the grant. They wanted to see the actual canceled check. So again, if I didn't have a good finance person, if I had to go find that myself, that would have not been great. You know, so all of this is a lot, but if you've got the right team, it gets done. And not only that, if you've got the right team, you get buy-in from everyone. So let's talk about why we call grant seeking a team sport. But first, we have got a poll here. So I'm going to launch this. We're going to give us about 30 seconds. So I'm just curious, for those of you in here, which of these best describes how you have done team grant seeking in the past? And nobody in. Okay, there we go. Starting to come in. Give this about 10 more seconds. Oh, we're seeing the two extremes. Interesting. No one apparently wants to be in the squishy middle. Okay. Let's share this and see what's up. So this is interesting. We had no one in the middle. 40% of you are a lone wolf and have never worked in a team or don't work in a team, and 60% of you have led a team through applying and completing the work. So for those of you who are a lone wolf, I'm hoping we can convince you to not be. And for those of you who have led the team, I'm hoping you'll get some good tips out of this. So again, please, especially for those of you who may have experience in this, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A at any point here. So let's talk about why the team approach. The most obvious is that these are complex grants. I just kind of showed you there's lots of work. You know, even for those of us who do federal grants all the time, you know, when we are doing a federal grant, we assume it's going to take between 40 to 80 hours to do one. So that, you know, per person hours, you know, not necessarily spread evenly across a team, but that is a fair amount. That's 2 weeks of someone's time. And very few people have that kind of time on their own. There's not a lot of people that can say, okay, the next 2 weeks, I'm just writing this grant. And also the details require some in-depth knowledge. So it's a little ridiculous to assume that no matter how good you are, no matter how much you know about your organization, that you're going to have all these details at the tip of your tongue or right in the front of your brain. So it is a little bit difficult to handle this without a team. So that's sort of our first thing. The other thing is that you get buy-in. And this, I think, is underrated. I talked about the example of working in a college where the administration was applying for things that the faculty didn't necessarily want to do. That didn't make the faculty happy. They weren't like, oh, yay, there's grant money coming in. They were like, okay, here's this thing I don't want to do, and now I have to do it because we have grant money. So that is not a good situation, and there was not buy-in. So when you assemble a team, you get to have buy-in from the start, and that makes things successful. So if you give everyone a voice in deciding that we're actually going to pursue the grant, if it's not just one person saying, yes, we're doing this, get on board. Making sure that there is some clear understanding of what the strategic fit of that grant is. And we're going to talk about the various roles here on the team in about 10 seconds. And we'll talk about why it's important to have the executives on board. Also, getting input from the people who will actually carry out the work. So it's not you as an executive or a development director designing this program in your head. That's never great. And also coming up with a realistic budget and staffing plan, because what I, as a development person, might think is realistic, a program person may not. So let's talk about how we bring the team together and who should be on that team to make sure that we can get that buy-in. So we'll go through each of these, but you want to make sure that you have got basically your fundraising staff, your executive staff, your program staff, your finance staff, evaluation, and HR on board. And I know for a lot of us, some of these are the same person. I know finance and HR together is very popular. Your program staff may also have an evaluator on there, whatever that is. This is not necessarily a list of 7 people. Is that 7? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 7. Whew. It's not necessarily a list of 7 people. It's a list of 7 roles, and some people take on multiple roles. But you want to make sure that all of those roles are covered. So let's talk about who is responsible for what on this ideal team. So first of all, let's talk about the fundraising staff. So pre-award, the fundraising staff on a well-functioning team, they're the ones who are keeping an eye on funding, doing the research, being aware of what opportunities are out there. The fundraising staff is usually the process manager for all of this because they're the ones who understand what it takes to write the grant and what's going to be needed. They should have an understanding of the program that you're applying to and its requirements, but they should not be the only ones. Obviously, the fundraising staff is ultimately responsible for writing. So they're going to be doing the project management of the grant writing and doing the actual writing or submitting. And their job isn't done because there's always reports. And if you're reporting on a grant, you want to make sure that it is in the same style and the same, saying the same things that you said in the grant. So you want to be involved in the reporting. You're going to need data from someone else, but usually it's the fundraising staff who is writing the report. So that is the fundraising staff job through all this. Let's talk about the executive director. The executive director's job, pre-award, they are the convener. And it's so important for this. I'm going to talk about this a little more in the when things go wrong. But when the executive staff, when your executive director is the one saying to this team that we're going to put together, hey, this is important to our strategy as an organization, let's all work on this. That lends so much to it more than me, the development person, saying, hey, this looks like a good pile of money, let's go get it. Also, the executive director being on board on this can help provide the strategic direction and avoid mission creep. I have on here guardian of mission fit. That is something that executive staff can bring to make sure that those of us who are responsible for raising X dollars in a year don't get lost in that, and this being a big chunk of that X, and are actually making sure that this grant furthers the mission of the organization. Also, the executive staff is usually really good in securing partnerships. Whether that's the executive director or your director of programs or development director, usually they know who's doing what out there and can help get those partnerships. But they also have some post-award jobs too. So once it is awarded, especially with federal, you end up having to negotiate the exact agreement. That is great when it's the executive director and the finance person doing it together. That works out very well. And really has the ultimate responsibility for the work. And you'll see this, I'm going to flag this on a few people. They can come in and out as needed. Sometimes as the executive director comes to the first meeting, says, hey, we're going to apply for this grant to help expand our, whatever program. And, then I will be back to read the draft and help with whatever's needed. But they don't have to be, and you probably don't want your executive director spending their time, on this all day, every day. They can come in and out when needed. So the next thing is the program manager and PI. This PI is from federal grants. It's your primary investigator. That is from NSF, and everybody, that is like the major funder amongst federal grants. So everybody kind of just takes their term. So we are talking about the person who is in charge of actually doing whatever this work is. So your program director, one of your program staff, something like that. And that person needs to be the champion of the project. So that probably shouldn't be fundraising and probably shouldn't be the ED, although for some smaller organizations, the executive director may be this person. This is the person who's like, yes, this is a great idea. We're going to do it. Let's go. The PI, your program manager or PI, needs to know all of the requirements of the program. So both for applying and doing. So yes, the development staff needs to know what what's required for the proposal, but somebody needs to know inside and out, here is what this is requiring that we do, here is how we are going to do it. And this is going to be the best person to do that. And they should be the one that can answer any questions about the program and the proposal. So this should be the person, this should be your go-to. This is the person who has the program developed in their head, in their notes, whatever, and is going to be the guiding light on that. Obviously, post-award, this person is probably managing all of the work that gets done. Also working with the evaluators and overseeing the reporting. So that doesn't mean necessarily doing the reports. That just means making sure that whatever data is supposed to be collected is. And with the federal grant, this person usually ends up being the main contact with the agency because the agency wants the person actually doing the work as their main contact, not the development person or the finance person. And really, this person kind of being the champion, being the owner can make the difference. This can be make or break, more so than the greatest grant writers in the world. This can be make or break on getting this done appropriately, doing what you said you were going to do, doing it within budget, etc. So choose this person wisely. So let's talk about the program staff. So again, this is usually will be program staff. If your champion, your PI is, maybe your program director or whoever's leading the program that you're going to be funding. These are the doers. These are the people who are actually going to be doing that work. And they need a voice in the design and frankly, what promises are made in the proposal. Again, where we see things go off the rails is when this doesn't happen and people are like, hey, we got this new grant and here's what we're going to do. And they have no idea what's coming. So they need a voice. And one of the things that they need to be able to do is to advocate for their own capacity, because a lot of times, development staff, executive staff see the dollar signs and get real excited and don't realize that, hey, this is going to add, 10 hours a week to already overworked staff. They're not going to be able to get this done. So having those staff have the ability to raise their hand and say, yeah, this is not going to work is crucial. Also, they may be assigned some pieces of the proposal writing. So if you have a couple staff that are doing one section of what you're going to get, again, I'm thinking of like a HRSA grant where you might be doing counseling services and you've got a drug counselor and a mental health counselor, and you're talking about two different things. They may write each little piece of that again through coordination of the PI and the development staff, but they might be the ones who are writing those little sections. And their work obviously is not done. Post-award, they're the ones who are actually doing this work. They're working with the PI and getting it done. They should be tracking things. They should be tracking their expenses. They should be tracking their hours because you've got to report back on all of those. And they should be assisting in reporting that way. So again, crucial, and it's great to have them involved in the start. We'll talk about kind of how that works. And then there's finance. If you have a good finance person, they are worth their weight in gold, platinum, whatever's more valuable right now. Because they need to be able to have a voice to talk about not only what should the budget for the grant be, but what will the impact on the budget be? So the organization's budget. If we get this money, yes, it's going to add these dollars, but what do we have to do? If you're not careful, there are ways to actually lose money on getting a large grant. Especially if it's sometimes there's a 50-50 match required. So, the the government or the foundation will pay 50% of the expenses and you're expected to raise the other 50%. Depending on how that's done, and especially if you're going into a new program, it can cost you money to get money sometimes on these. And having finance in here can be a real help on avoiding that. Post-award too, obviously negotiating the agreement with the executive director, monitoring the spending, doing the financial reporting, all of that is crucial. Again, this is somebody who can kind of come in and out as needed. They look at the budget, they make sure everything's okay, and they move on until the reporting happens, and that's fine. So let's talk about the evaluators. So almost every single large grant, federal, national, whatever, is going to want some sort of evaluation. They want to know how you are going to evaluate what you're doing to make sure you're being successful. So if you have an evaluator that your organization uses or that the program uses, that's great. Get them involved in the beginning to talk about how it's going to be evaluated, what the mechanisms are, and then set up those mechanisms while you're waiting for the funding. It's not going to hurt to have more evaluation within what you're doing. They also, will sometimes, if you've got internal evaluation staff and you're required to have an external, again, federal sometimes demands an external, and we'll also do, between 5 to 15% of the budget to pay for it. So, that's okay. Your internal evaluator can sometimes recommend an external evaluator. And you want to make sure just that they're helping with that design, because again, you don't want your development staff to be doing your evaluation design. And then post-award, obviously they have to carry out the evaluation. They should be helping with troubleshooting, and they should be assisting with reporting, again, coming in and out as needed. So next up, we have HR. So almost every large grant that you get is going to have your staff doing things that are funded by the grant. I said too many words. Every grant you get is going to have your staff doing something funded by the grant. So HR needs to have some responsibility for that. So pre-award, they can help come up with the staffing plan. Whether when someone in the program department raises their hand and says, hey, we can't do this work with the staff we have, HR can help develop the job description for what you're going to need. They can help with the hiring, et cetera, et cetera. So having them involved, again, is super helpful, just so you're not springing on them, hey, we need 2 new staff for this grant that's coming in. So they can help develop that from the start and help with budgeting for that. And then obviously post-award, they will do the hiring. Hopefully there's going to be hours tracking. Hopefully you're using some kind of a system that is centralized where HR can just do a report on the hours being spent on the grant and all of that for reporting. And, just sort of generally assisting with reporting. So again, they don't go away. So a couple more here. Partner organizations. Again, most federal and many large grants prefer partnerships. They want to know that they're getting the best bang for their buck. So there's a few things here, and partner organizations should not get a free ride. They should be helping. If they're going to be your partner organization, especially if they're getting money from the grant, if they're going to be a sub-grantee, they should be helping from the start. They should be helping to shape the program. They should be talking about, what their staff is going to do, what funding they need for it, and assisting in completing the proposal. If they're going to be written into the grant, they should be active participants from the start. Also, post-award, they need to keep doing the work. So if you're working with a partner organization, they are responsible for completing the work just as much as you are. They should be tracking their hours and spending if they're a sub-grantee, and they should be assisting in reporting. So, they need to be a full partner from the start. We see a lot of times, you get that letter of support that's just sort of vague, and then you get the grant money, and then your partner's like, wait, we said we would do what? And things start to fall apart from there. So, it's important to have them in from the start. But let's talk about a few ground rules for how this works, because it's not enough to get all these people in a room and say, okay, we're writing a grant. There's got to be a few things to make this work. And this is not a team for the sake of being a team. This needs to be a real team, and everyone needs to contribute their voice and needs to do a great job on whatever work they are assigned. So everybody needs to be empowered is what it comes down to. And that can come from the executive director sort of by edict of, hi, you are now all doing this. Please give us your input. But it should be made clear from the very beginning that everyone has the ability to speak their mind in this. They should be able to raise concerns without feeling like they're letting the team down. And they should be able to stop the process. I think of forever ago, and I'm dating myself, when Saturn was a new car company. I'm really dating myself. They were a new car company in the 80s. They ran these ads talking about how any employee could pull the handle and stop the line if they saw anything wrong. And that has obviously stuck with me for decades now, because that's what I think of with this. Everyone on the team should be empowered to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I don't think this is going to work, and here's why. Or, hey, this is a problem. And there should, again, you have to build the team so that that everyone knows that they're all equal parts, and you don't just have to go along because your boss says so. I realize that's easier said than done, and it's an art, not a science. But if you don't have a real team, you're just sort of pushing around work. And I will remind everyone too that getting money and failing is worse than not getting the money at all. Misspending federal money, not spending federal money correctly, not doing what you said you were going to do to a large funder is not great. You're often better off having not been a grantee in the first place. So make sure that what you're doing, you're able to do, or what you say you're going to do, you're able to do. So what are the results of that? You get a better program plan. I mean, you end up with a program that's better than one person can design just by the way this works. You get shared work for the proposal. So one person's not taking it on, and you're going to get better content out of it. Everyone is moving in the same direction. Everybody has been on since the ground floor. So you get that faster start if you're awarded. You're not then going back and explaining to the team that's going to actually do the work what they need to do. They've been in since the beginning. They know exactly what's happening. And that leads to more successful work, almost universally. You get better results when everyone is empowered from the beginning and knows what's going on. So that is on building up your team. So the other thing you want to have out of your team is a shared work plan. So I'm going to send us another poll question here. It's going to be similar to the other one. I'm curious who uses work plans or who has any experience using them. So let's give this, we'll give it probably 20 seconds here. And so far, our most popular answer is the most popular answer I've seen. Oh, okay, we're evening out. Couple more seconds here. Okay, we have got almost a tie. No, now we've got a tiebreaker. Okay, so let's take a look here. So, okay, work plan, why would I need one of those is no one, which is great. But yeah, when we talk about this with people, when we do this poll, I've sometimes created a work plan, but it quickly conflicted with reality. Is a popular one. And there's really, I mean, frankly, no way around that, because you can either adhere to a work plan that's not going to work, or you can change your work plan, but you don't just want to keep at it because you can. And I love to, a couple of people use a work plan every time they work with multiple people, so that's great, so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. So I am somewhat preaching to the choir here, but again, let's talk about what makes this, what makes a strong work plan. So why do this? So I say on here, a list of to-dos without clear responsibility for who does what is just a wish list. It's not going to get done. So a work plan takes time, but it's really essential to the process, and it will save you time and probably lots of headaches in the end. I know it's human nature that you'd rather spend an hour, 5 minutes at a time than half an hour to not spend that hour, but we have to fight against that a little bit. If you have got a good work plan, it will detail the responsibilities for everybody involved and confirms who's doing what. It lays out specific activities that have to be accomplished and the timeline for getting them done. So for example, letters of support could be a couple tasks that are, someone needs to identify partners, that might be the executive director. Someone needs to draft letters, that might be the finance. Finalize those and send to the partner, that might be the executive director. Follow up to make sure they get in, that might be the executive director. But it lets you break down these responsibilities into some tasks and assign them to people to get things done. The other thing that work plans are great for is they can sometimes inadvertently indicate an organization's readiness to apply. So let's say you've got the average 6 to 8 weeks to write this grant. Say we're doing a federal grant, And you make this great work plan, and you're like, okay, the program staff is going to have come up with the staffing plan and project plan and how it fits in with our current work in the next 2 weeks. And they come back in 2 weeks and say, yeah, we spent 3 hours on this and can't figure out any of this. It doesn't fit in with what we do. This we thought this was going to work, but it's not. That can be a great off-ramp or a great conversation starter for that off-ramp of, this should have been a real simple thing and it's not. Is that because we thought it was simple and it's not? Or is that because it should be simple and it's not for us because we don't have that? We're not able to do whatever that is. So, it can be a real great way to not only have accountability, but to kind of gut check and say, hey, we maybe can't do this because we're not going to be remotely able to do this in the timeline we laid out. The best way to build one of these is to work your way back. And what's great to the person who asked the question about, knowing what grants are out there, sometimes if you're pursuing an annual program that hasn't been released, you can have some time to work back from that. So every year the program you want to apply to is released in April. You don't have to wait for that April release to do this. You can start on things early on. You can say, okay, we know this is going to come out in April, but before then, we know every year this program requires that you have a budget and partners and talk about this and talk about that. Let's do this ahead of time. So you do have this opportunity to kind of start with when it's going to be due and work your way backwards. And that really lets you back things up and break things into reasonable steps and manageable pieces. So, you've got that ability to say, okay, we know there's this, we've got to write this 40-page narrative based on the RFP or based on what comes out every year. Let's break this up across, get that done. It's important to have realistic due dates for those. And those can be based on, both sides of, look, we can't be attaching this stuff, or we can't just be getting back our letters of support 2 days before it's due. We've got to have them at least a week to make sure there's not errors. So that's working backwards. That's making sure you've got time. But then also on the other end, you can set it up as, okay, we know it's going to take at least 2 weeks to draft these, find our partners, go back and forth, have a discussion, and then get these in. So you kind of, you look at we've got to have some padding before the due date, and we've got to have some padding on this end to get it done, and come up with your date. And if you do it well, they'll be realistic and they will get done. But you sort of got to be thorough and think through what needs to get done and include some checkpoints to ensure it actually is being done. So, a draft is due to the next person who's going to review it by X date, or we need to have partners locked in by this date, whatever that is. Just making sure that whatever your tasks are, that they've got realistic timelines, but there's actually some checkpoints to know that they're getting done. You don't want to have your work plan say narrative will be completed 5 days before due date with nothing else. Because what happens if the narrative is not completed? You've had no check-ins, whoever was supposed to do it forgot about it, and now you've got nothing. So you've got to make sure you've got some sort of realistic checkpoints in there too. The other thing too is when we do these, we like to have a champion of the work plan, and that is usually the fundraising person. So there's usually a fundraising team member who's project managing and monitors the work plan and makes updates. And that person should be able to check in with team members, know what's happening when, do reminders when they're necessary, etc. But it shouldn't be top down. Again, we talked about everybody having input, and everyone should be able to raise concerns. So, if you're talking about things and it seems like something major is off track, again, you've got to be able to pull that handle on the assembly line, and flag that. The other thing with that too is when you're working on the work plan, there's often some kind of a ripple effect where you've got to get thing A done before you can get thing B done before you can even start thing C. And if thing A gets not done or thing A ends up way behind, you've got to know that for B and C. So the point of all that is to make sure you have got one person who just is the champion of the work plan and making sure things are getting done when they should. So let's talk about how this works in reality. So this is a great way of using your work plan as a reality check. You guys can read along. I'm going to read through it, but essentially we had a client that was a large organization that was going for the JP Morgan Advancing Cities opportunity. For those of you who don't know that one, that requires a city, a nonprofit, I believe a business. It's one of those where you've got to have a whole bunch of moving parts. So we were in charge of coordinating the multiple partners. We're actually working for a foundation that was going to be the main lead in it. And we're in charge of kind of wrangling all this. So in one of the first steps of our work, we came up with this crazy detailed proposal plan that had responsibilities for everybody. It was a very large Excel sheet with a lot of dates, a lot of names, trying to just get all of this stuff in and manageable. And unfortunately, pretty quickly, we began to fall way behind on partners not meeting deadlines. And it wasn't because they were lazy and not doing them. It was just they didn't have the info. Their program wasn't as far along as they thought. They thought that something was happening that's not. So we kept being able to not meet these deadlines. And our partner, who was a foundation, was actually able to call out the items behind schedule. And luckily, we didn't do this. They kind of had this come to Moses meeting where they sat all the partners down. They said, "Look, you guys are behind on this. You guys are behind on this. We're behind on this." And it turned into a real frank discussion that they were not going to be able to get everything done in time. They were not realistically going to be able to apply for this. And frankly, they were wasting each other's time with not doing that, or by not being able to do that. So they called off the project. They said, "Look, we are not going to get this done in time." But they had this great work plan, and it was real easy to change. I think this was 2018. It was really easy to change 2018 to 2019 in all the dates. And they actually backdated a bunch of stuff and then spent the year working on it and put together a great application for the next year. I cannot remember if it got funded. That would be a fun part to end the story on. But it was a very strong proposal because somebody said, "Hey, let's not submit this garbage proposal that we can put together. Let's take the time, redo our work plan, make this a year long, and get everybody on the same page and doing this like while we've got time to do it." And it got done, and it was great. So by having that clear expectation, the other thing too that's not said here is that these partners all could have ended up hating each other, and none of them are going anywhere. They're all going to be forced to work together. So this could have created a whole bunch of bad blood, but it didn't, because there was this clear plan with clear responsibilities. And luckily it wasn't just one organization not pulling its weight. It was everybody struggling with the ability to get it done. And because there was that clear expectation, it was like, "Hey, no fault, no problem. We can't make it work. Let's do it for next year." So it saved a bunch of relationships too. I don't know if it's always going to do that, but in this case, that worked out really well. So this can be a great way if you're putting your work plan together too. You might just see, even as you're putting it together, you might see, "Hey, there's no way we can get this done in time." Or you might have your work plan together and see, as you're going through the early stages of it, that you're not going to be able to get things done in time. And that's fine, because again, you don't want to waste people's time putting together a proposal that's not going to get funded because it's not good. And you definitely don't want to put together a proposal where you promise you're going to do things and then not do them because you can't. So it's important to have that work plan across everything. I don't think you necessarily need to do one for a small 10-page grant that you do every year, but they are great to have for a lot of larger proposals, and especially first-time proposals where you're working with multiple people. So let's put this all together. How does this work in actuality? I like to do this because I know when I do training, a lot of time it's like, okay, that's great for some other organization, or if we ever have time. And that's not the case. So let's talk about how to wrap this all together. And this is I will say, mostly fictionalized conglomeration of various client experiences from several of us at GrantsPlus. So let's put it all together for an example. Excuse me. So our phony organization here, the Good Works organization, found a SAMHSA opportunity. That is it's HHS's Mental Health and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency. So a good SAMHSA opportunity that looks like it would totally support the counseling work that the organization does. So the program director saw that and was like, "Hey, this looks like it's something we do." So she went to the VP for development, and the VP for development said, "Hey, that seems like a great idea too. Let's see what they did next." So the program director found that it looks like it would support the counseling work and be a big part of it, took the opportunity to the VP for development, and then took it to the executive director. Remember I talked about having that buy-in from the executive director. So took that to the executive director, who thought it was a good opportunity to advance the mission. So let's talk about this a little bit. Step one in here, find the champion. So the program director didn't have the time to lead the project if it was funded. She knew that. So she then went and figured out, where do we go from here? So finding the champion ends up being crucial because the program director didn't have time to lead the project. And she found the counseling director who stepped up and said, okay, I will take this over. So again, this is the made up process that we've seen happen well in a couple of clients. So what did they do next? So again, I'm going to use PI throughout this because it's quicker, but we're talking about the program manager for the grant. So they gathered the team. The PI and the director of development identified the best members of the team, who would be involved, who would have the knowledge, and then went to the executive director and said, hey, here's our grant. Here's the team we want to work on it. If we get the money, here's who's going to work on it. Let's have a team. Executive directors said, great, and sent out an email to the team for a kickoff meeting. And it's great that comes from the executive director because that says, hey, the executive director of the organization, all of our boss, says that this is a good opportunity for us and shows the commitment of the full organization. And it also kind of helps the team members feel handpicked and see it as a team effort. Rather than, just two people found it and started writing it and end up getting overwhelmed. So what happens next? Well, they had the first meeting. The executive director kicked it off and said, hey, this is great. Here's how this fits our mission. This is why we want to do this. This isn't just because we need money. This is because it's going to help us do what we do. It's going to help us serve people. We've seen clients that don't have that executive blessing, and it kind of leads to issues sometimes. Also, it helps identify, sorry about that. Also, it quickly identifies who the PI is in the first meeting. Who is the person who's leading this, who's got all the knowledge, and kind of talks about what would be needed from each person in a broad, not working out the work plan exactly, but talks about what's needed from each person broadly. And then discussing some deadlines and having a discussion of what the to-dos are and developing that work plan. So from there, you need to develop your work plan. This can be a separate meeting. This can be a subset. This can be everyone. It all depends how your organization works. The more people that you can have give realistic input, the better, but you also don't necessarily need people there just for the sake of doing it. But the director of development led this discussion where everyone agreed on what they would contribute to the project. So again, that's important where you're not assigning things, you're having a discussion of the people who are going to be involved, of who is going to do what. Again, if you have 20 counselors, you don't need all 20 counselors in the room for this, but having their boss and one or two of them in might be important. And all of them agreed to the deadlines. Everything felt reasonable for everyone. So in the end, the development department is going to manage the work plan, but everybody else has sort of come up with it. So we get to actually writing the proposal. So, the vice president or the development director, checked in to make sure that people were making progress, that they didn't wait until the deadlines passed to figure out there was a problem. There was regular check-ins. The team maybe had a couple Zoom meetings or a couple check-ins to make sure things were on track. Not meetings for the sake of meetings, but meetings to make sure everyone's in line. And if there was any danger of a no-go on this, it would have been brought up in these meetings. Somebody would have figured it out. And then once everybody got their pieces in, the development staff prepared the proposal, the PI and the program staff reviewed it, and it got submitted. So team members reviewed things, they gave some feedback, and the development department incorporated them and submitted the grant. So that's a nice little pat way of doing that for the team. One of the things that's nice to have that I didn't put on here is a debrief afterwards, and this can be 30 minutes, but just making sure that everyone who is on the team got something out of it, whether it was a feeling of being involved, whether it was feeling like they contributed, or just knowing what's going on, making sure that people got out of it. and revealing any issues that can be resolved too. Maybe you find somebody in the debrief who says, yeah, I felt like I wasn't really used for this at all. And that can help with that in the future. So it's nice to have that. So what happens after the proposal was funded? Well, that was on the PI, like we talked about. The program director is the one who is making this all happen. So she gets to work and gets the project started. The finance department set up tracking, put a new line in the ledger and set up financial tracking for things. HR posted a job for a new console that was going to be required for it, got that going. The evaluation team set up the tracking systems they promised they were going to set up, and got those going. And the CEO thanked everybody for all their roles and success. And again, this is a quick email that helps do that kind of capstone of thank you for all of you for helping us get this grant, and not having it just be another thing that just sort of falls into the pile of all of our work, but really call it out as a great team effort. And then post-award, doing the work, tracking the spending, tracking the hours, all that stuff we talked about. Everybody does that well, and everything gets done, and the grant reports get submitted, and everyone is happy. And the PI or the development department is not tearing their hair out because they're doing this all by themselves. So what makes this work? The biggest thing is having the right people in the right seats. And I can't tell you exactly what that looks like for your organization, but I bet you can. That is the big key of all of this. But also everyone understanding why this is important, not just, oh, this is that grant that Susan wants. Making sure that this is the organization's grant, making sure that everybody knows why they're there, why they're going for it. Making sure that everyone had a voice. So either every person or every department that was impacted by it, who's going to be doing the work, had their chance to say, yes, we can do this, no, we can't do that. This is a good idea, this is a bad idea, whatever that is, making sure that they have a voice. And that there was not one person scrambling to develop this all, because that never ends up well. As good as a grant writer as you might be, if you're doing this all by yourself, it's not going to get done well. So let's talk about where we have seen this fail. The biggest thing, and again, this is more about team dynamics than anything about grant writing, is that team members feel that the grant only benefits one person or one department, and it's not benefit to the organization's mission or to the organization's clients. So having everybody on board and maybe even having that discussion early either lets you say, hey, yeah, you're right, this does only do that. Or yes, I understand your concerns, but here's how it benefits the entire organization. So being able to have that. Where we also see this fail is when there is no executive direction to ensure that it actually does fit the organization's strategy. Because that's how you have it really do end up being just Susan's grant instead of the organization's grant, when there's not that buy-in from the top and when that's not shown. Also, when the work is developed from the top and is not challenged. So, the program director says, we're getting this grant, everybody do this, here's what we're going to do, without any feedback, without any buy-in. That's where you end up with people kind of resenting it, not wanting to do it well, etc. Also, team members feeling pressured to give into unrealistic deadlines or have unrealistic assignments. Where I've been in a couple meetings on things like this, where someone higher up in the organization says, Jim, you need to do this. Susan, you need to do this. Bob, you need to do this. Go get it done. With no feedback of why that's not going to work, or why that may have problems, or why somebody else might be better. Excuse me. So again, team members being able to have that voice gets you out of that problem where somebody just doesn't get saddled with something that can't get done, whether it's unrealistic that it will get done. So that is what I have got for today. We're just about at our time. Excuse me. Just kind of a quick review. So why great grant seeking takes a team? Because no one person generally has all the knowledge required to write a great grant. So you spread responsibilities across your team members by making sure you've got the right people doing the right thing, by making sure all the departments that are going to be affected are represented, and by making sure that everyone is kind of rowing the same direction, I think is the phrase. And also developing your shared work plan, making sure that everyone has clear expectations, clear deadlines, clear check-ins, and knows that things are going to get done. That helps you ensure that everything gets done. So that is all I've got for today. We are like 2 minutes out here. Just a reminder, our next one is December 14th at noon. It's 2 weeks from right now. And that is on attracting national funders for your organization. And if you're interested in coaching, please sign up in the link that will be in your email by Friday to sign up for December coaching. So any other questions? I don't see any in the Q&A. I think with that, I will let everybody go. Thank you all. This has been great, and I hope to see you all in 2 weeks.